which is titled Thinking Through the Reading-Writing Connection, and our speaker is DJ Henry. DJ is a veteran teacher with over 25 years of community college classroom experience. She has served on several federally funded grants designed to infuse teaching and learning with sound pedagogies and technological supports, and she has extensive experience in the standardized testing of literacy competencies. She worked with the state of Florida from 1982 to 2002 as an item writer, rubric writer, and reader for the college-level academic skills test and the state developmental reading and writing exit exam. DJ has also served as a reader for the Florida Teacher Certification Exam, FTCE, for over 15 years. She is the author of several well-known and well-regarded series, including a 3-book college reading series and a 2-book writing series. Additionally, she has also published innovations in authentic assessments that utilize student portfolio pedagogies. In her session, DJ will discuss a balanced approach to the teaching of literacy by integrating the best practices of reading and writing instruction. The presentation offers classroom activities that prompt and nurture students' process learning, active involvement, and metacognition by tapping into the similar, complementary developmental processes of reading and writing. DJ, are you ready to get started? DJ, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Great.
Okay. I'm sorry. I've been talking away.
No, don't worry about it.
Well, thank you, everyone, for giving your time this afternoon during your lunch hour to join us in this discussion about all the changes that are going on in our discipline. I wanted to begin by saying that I've put together kind of an ambitious presentation here. I'm going to be drawing up about a dozen documents that are camera ready for you to use in your classrooms, but that means that I'll be toggling back and forth between the PowerPoint presentation and the documents that I've hyperlinked to. I also have a hypersensitive mouse, so if I have to kind of play around with it, please bear with me. I wanted to begin by actually giving some reassurance as I've gone across the country and talked to various folks who are working on a redesign to integrate reading and writing. There's a great deal of anxiety that's being expressed about this change. And really and truly, when we really get into the nuts and bolts of it, we're doing something new in the fact that we're actually teaching both in the same semester. But this is actually building upon decades of sound pedagogies that we already have in place. So the task is not as overwhelming as it first seems once we get into it. And it's also important to remember that reading and writing is a dialogue. It's a transactional process. So it can be integrated, but it's not simultaneous. So what we're trying to teach students to do is to put on that hat, that thinking like a reader when it's appropriate and then thinking like a writer when it's necessary. So that means oftentimes what we're asking students to do is when they are writing to consider their reader and when they are reading to consider the writing. Now to do that, we're going to offer them a reading and writing tasks that vary in purpose. And really and truly these are directed thinking and learning activities. And just to show you that this is built on our existing pedagogies, let me share with you this preview of what we're going to be looking at today. And if you just look over this list and do a very quick self-assessment about whether or not you use this, you've heard of it, or you've never heard of it, perhaps even you've heard of it but you haven't really used it. These are the actual abbreviated titles of some of the activities that we're going to be looking at today that are, like I said, camera ready for you to use. And I've also included a QR code. If you have a QR reader on your smartphone, you can take a picture of this code and you can access all of these documents immediately. And I know Pearson is really good about sharing these materials after the webinar, so I also included a hyperlink in case you do not have the actual QR reader. So if you've taken a moment to just evaluate whether or not you have seen any of these things, if you're a reading teacher, some of these will make more sense to you, and if you're a writing teacher, others will make more sense to you. But these all can be used in a reading-writing pedagogy. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to minimize these on my toolbar so that we can come back to them later as we need to. So each one of these activities that you just looked at, they actually are addressing these various purposes that are listed here. Reading to learn, writing to learn, reading for enjoyment. I would love to have been able to put that up there, but that's not really our focus right now today. And writing to express. And two ways in which we express ideas is the traditional way in the standalone writing course where we teach students to inform, to entertain, and to persuade. And then in the integrated courses, we're really focusing on writing in response to reading. So let me just kind of make some connections here. I thought a great deal about how to actually list these for you so that you can see the connections. And the connections are so flexible and even sometimes complex that listing or doing comparative charts wasn't doing it for me. So I thought instead to look at it this way. First, we ask students to read, to learn an idea, to learn about a theme or a concept. And then we usually are asking them to write in response to that reading. So here's the transactional dialogue right there. But for them to do it, we're asking them to do it with a purpose. Are they going to inform, entertain, or persuade? And quite frankly, most of the time, we're asking students to either inform or persuade. Do they agree with what they've read, or who else needs to know this information, and who do they want to share it with? So these are the three right here that we usually, I find most teachers want to talk about most of the time. But to be able to do these three, we actually have to guide students into reading to learn language and reading to learn structure. So sometimes we'll direct them not to just think about the theme, but we'll actually ask them to look at how a writer uses figurative language or punctuation or sentence structure. And then we're going to ask those students to write in a way that might imitate or model what they saw. And you know, this is a very sound pedagogy because Bloom's taxonomy for the psychomotor skills has imitation as the large foundation from which students then climb up the knowledge ladder to application and creation. But learning really begins through imitation. So sometimes we're going to ask students just to read, to take note of the language or the structure. But none of this really works, doesn't really stick until we ask students to think about what they're doing. All the research indicates that the students that are the most successful, the students that actually internalize what we're teaching them, are thinking about what they're doing before, during, and after the learning process. So this writing to learn, this self-assessment, is something that reading teachers have been asking students to do for since the beginning of reading curriculum. So reading teachers who feel as if they're not equipped to teach writing really have far more training and capability and understanding about the reading-writing connection than I think we give conscious thought to. And of course, in terms of the writing pedagogy, when we ask students to do peer editing and to review and to reflect upon their own writing habits and style and what they need to learn, we're asking them to self-assess. The thing that really helps in the reading-writing pedagogy is to be very deliberate in asking students to do this metacognition, to do this self-assessment, to use writing to learn about their own learning process, and to do it in a way that they capture it with their writing. And that's a think aloud. Oftentimes when we teach by thinking aloud. We will say to the students, as I read, this is what I thought. As I write, these are the things that I do. Well, that's thinking out loud about the reading and the writing process. So that's exactly what we're asking our students to do. And we're asking them to do it on paper. And that list of activities that I just showed you at the beginning of the presentation, those handouts that I'm going to give you, are all metacognitively rich, very specific directed thinking and learning activities. So the rest of the presentation is really pulling up each one of those and looking at them. And again, you are welcome to copy these, distribute them, and use them, and give me feedback if at all possible. So the first one is, and this is the overview. This first slide has a series of handouts that really that gives the students the big picture. You know, our students, developmental students, often do not get the big picture. They're pretty driven by what's on the test. You know, is this going to be on the test? Did we do anything important in class today? They're just not getting the big picture. So in the early weeks of the semester, I really like to show them the big picture and then always redirect each activity back into that big picture. How does what we're doing today fit into the big picture? So here is a reading-writing strategy that can be handed out as a self-assessment. It doesn't have to be. I have another draft of this where it's not a self-assessment at all. It's just an information sheet. But I like the self-assessment approach because it's so interactive, and it really allows students to see that they must apply what they're learning to their own steps, that these are action steps that they can take. And this writing strategy is actually very sound research. This is based on the SQ3R blended with our traditional writing process. So both reading and writing have before, during, and after thinking steps. So you can see that I have allowed the students to visualize what this would look like. Now, overall, this whole thing is a reader response. Here's a piece of reading, here's a piece of text you're going to read, you're going to go through this process, and at the end you're going to have a polished draft of your written response to it. But throughout each one of these phases, we can incorporate reading and writing to learn activities that will help students get to that final drafted response to the text itself. So not every single piece of writing that the students are doing has to be, you know, in direct response. Sometimes it's looking at structure. Sometimes it's looking at language. Sometimes it's looking at the essays format or the paragraph format. Whatever it is that you have determined that your students need to learn and you have focused on that particular skill and concept, you can tie it very nicely into this large picture here. Now I also put some, you can see at the bottom I put some time on task blanks here because I want students to see that there is a correlation between effort and success, effort and progress, effort and mastery. And I also tell students that, you know, reading and writing are very individualistic processes. We all do it kind of differently. Our minds work very differently. And I might need to repeat a step that somebody else in the class doesn't need to repeat. I always use my sister as an example. She's brilliant, and she can read with a photographic memory and right away apply it. So she doesn't have to do as many reading steps as I have to do. So it's not about doing everything every single time. It's about selecting strategies that are going to work best for you. So I give this out at the beginning of the semester to get a baseline. And then, you know, usually what students do is they fill in everything and they say they do it all. And then when they produce actual work, we come back to what they said they did, and we compare it to what they actually do. And you know, it's a little aha moment, it's a little accountability moment there. I actually return to this several times throughout the semester and again at the end of the semester, and students love it. They love seeing how they have progressed throughout the semester. So this is the big picture. Now, I also want to give students the big picture in terms of a rubric. And I know that many of you probably have already started working on your own rubrics, or your department has a rubric. So I wanted to share something. This is from California. This is from the, they've been doing reading and writing for a while. So as you can see, this is from 2008, a pre-service training that they presented several years back. And why I chose this particular rubric is because it ties in so nicely with the reading writing strategy that I just showed you, the concept map. And again, this is an opportunity to start a dialogue with students. This is a tool that they can use to self-assess, but they can also use it to assess peers. And although this is for holistic scoring to help minimize the amount of time that you have to score so that you can give more scoring, you don't have to score every single thing that you assign them, therefore you can assign more in volume and give a holistic score. It can also be used for trait scoring, and it can also be used for directed thinking activities. If you are asking them to read to learn and to write to learn about language, and expression, the use of language, then that would be the focus on the rubric that you would turn their attention to. So I just thought it would be very helpful to have a rubric already set up, even one that you could modify, so that you could see how it ties in nicely to the overall strategy. Now this is again the big picture, and this is an outline of an entire teaching approach, and really it's an assessment approach as well, but for me teaching and assessment just go hand in hand. I mean, we don't assess what we assess only that which we teach, and everything that we teach with keeping in mind that we need to assess it to determine if it has been learned and if it needs to be retaught, revisited, or if the student can move on. And because one of the great things that students at the developmental level really need to learn is to take responsibility for their own learning. So again, back to the metacognitive, the think aloud, and the taking the responsibility, and asking students to recognize the relationship between their effort and their achievement. So this is an individualized learning plan. Other names for this has been portfolio or notebook assessment, whatever term you feel most comfortable using. But it really is an individualized learning plan. So it divides the semester into three phases: a diagnostic, a working, and an achievement phase. And how long each one of those phases lasts depends on the length of your semester. So the diagnostic phase is, of course, the first phase, and it's every single thing assigned in class. They have to keep track of it, and then they have to reflect upon what they've learned about themselves in terms of their strengths and their needs. Now, this list of activities that I have right here, the syllabus, the diagnostic test, the class, and the textbook notes, I might not have every single one of these assigned and accomplished by the time I need the diagnostic portfolio turned in. But I'll have a lot of these things in their hands so that they've had the opportunity to do a wide variety of directed learning activities. And they'll get feedback. And then they're to sit down and they're to think about what this reflects about their effort and about their need. And then there's to set up a study plan. And of course they have the guided questions, because students need concrete guidance. So I'm going to ask them what their needs are, where the lessons are. So I'm going to ask them to go to the My Labs. I'm going to ask them to go to the textbooks. And then, what times are they going to, even set up a study schedule. And in all honesty, they need to do this a couple of times before, I've really mostly asked them to do this. The first draft is not their best draft. So they do get, a couple of shots at this. But I find that they do get the idea, and particularly because there's always somebody in the class who gets it, and it can become a model for everybody else. The working phase is the entire semester. Every single thing that you assign, that they do, I tell them there's no busy work in this class. Everything needs to go in your notebook. And this teaches them how to organize their learning and really prepares them for student success in other classes. And then the last phase is the achievement phase. And of course, this is the very end of the semester. Depending on the length of the semester, it could just be a couple of days, it could be a week, it could be a couple of weeks. Again, most of our courses are being condensed into very short courses. So I tell them at the beginning of the semester that they're going to be looking, to prove their achievement. So be thinking about which pieces that they want throughout the entire semester. So they're not just thinking at the last minute, but we're planning for this presentation at the very end. And again, I give them guide questions and prompts so that they can come up with a cover letter that indicates what they think they have learned and what they perceive their score should be. And of course, these portfolios, the only way to deal with them, or these individualized learning plans, is to score them holistically. So I have a score sheet that I can use for all three phases if I want to, or I can just use it for the first and the last phase. But this is just one way in which to make students consistently think about what they're doing and take responsibility for their own work. And a key component of this that shows up in every assignment is the Dear Editor cover letter, because in a reading writing class, what we're really doing is to evaluate their reading. We're really, we may give them comprehension questions as we did in a traditional reading class, but we're really looking to see how they can respond in writing. So they really are going to be turning into us a written response to the lessons that we've set before them. So every time they turn in something for me to grade, I ask them to reflect upon their own effort and their purpose, what they think they've accomplished, and to ask for some advice. And again, this is a skill that they have to develop. And the first ones at the beginning of the semester are not nearly as well done as the ones at the end of the semester. But even that growth is very comforting and exciting and inspiring to both me and them. And you don't necessarily have to ask all of these questions, but I give all of them to you as the teacher right now. I give all of them so that you can have them, in your toolbox. So that's the big picture. But I have a second big picture slide as well, and that is what I just showed you in terms of the learning plans is the overall semester. But in terms of how to actually deliver instruction in the classroom, in a reading writing classroom, I have found that reciprocal teaching is just a wonderful way to actively engage students and to cut down on lecture time, because students don't really enjoy, or at least maybe you're a gifted lecturer and your students really enjoy listening to you, but I have found that their attention span is pretty short, and particularly when it comes to reading and writing topics, semicolons for writing, or even find the main idea for reading. So, it's disconnected to them, so just passively listening, which is what they often do, doesn't get it. This is collaborative learning, in which students are put into groups of 4, and each student is assigned a role as either a summarizer, a questioner, a clarifier, or a predictor. And I hand this sheet out to them, and we go over it, and we talk about what each role is and what they need to be doing. And then they read part of the text that's been assigned. And at a certain point, I ask them to stop, and I ask the summarizer to state the most important points of the passage so far. And then the questioner will ask some questions that indicate where there's some confusion perhaps, or some need for further clarification, and the clarifier tries to answer those questions. And then the predictor may offer an opinion about why this information is important or what's going to come up next. So this activity can be used to on an article from a newspaper, a journal, trade magazine, but also textbooks. And I no longer deliver or introduce a concept through lecture. I introduce a concept through reciprocal teaching. And I actually like to flip the classroom so that students are asked to, again, the homework, they're asked to do it outside of class. But if they don't, if they actually do not get to that homework because of their poor study skills, then when they come into class, they know that they're going to sit down and they're going to actually look at this material together. Now, of course, this is a reading, listening, discussion task, but because I believe so much in writing to learn, I also ask them to record the process as they're going through it. So this is a learning record, and I do not ask them to fill it out as a group because that means that one person's doing all the work, and maybe later on when they're more mature students that will work, but right now I want each one of them actively engaged. So I'm going to ask them to fill this out during the process and after the process. So let me put this in such a way that we can see it side by side. No, that's not the right one. Sorry. Here we go. Side by side. So here's the process, and then here is the sheet that will go along with it. So you can see that when they are asked to predict, they have to give some supports to that. What are the ideas? If they're asking questions, what are those questions about? Where do they need to clarify? Is it a word or a phrase or a sentence that needs some kind of clarification? And then at the end of the whole thing, they'll summarize. I know that in the actual discussion part, the student who is acting as the summarizer summarizes what's been read so far. But by the time the entire passage has been covered, I want them to summarize the most important ideas in the entire passage. So, because that's the ultimate goal there. So you can see that this is a reading and writing to learn activity. And this is very much what we're trying to do in our integrated instruction. And because summary is key to this particular activity, but it's also key to effective learning. The research indicates that one of the most efficient ways to learn is to summarize something. So summarization is used from day one and all the way throughout the curriculum. And students don't know how to summarize. So, it's a hard skill to learn. So I give them this handout to show them how we go through this as an activity. I actually ask them to do it on their own first, and then I'll show them the annotated passage and we'll work through it together, all the different annotations that are made, and then show them the actual summary. So this becomes its own lesson very early within the semester, and then throughout the semester they're asked to summarize in all sorts of different ways. Summarize what they've learned, summarize what they've read, summarize what they've written, so that they can really learn how to summarize. So those are the big pictures. Those are the overview, the pedagogies and the approaches. Now this slide contains all the directed, or a few of the directed reading, writing, learning activities. And if you look just at the titles, KWL is very much a reading curriculum. It's the foundation of reading curriculum. Cornell, two-column notes, is a note-taking, a reading activity. So you can see just right away that it looks like what we did in the reading class is going to translate very nicely into the writing class. And let me show you with the KWL. And the KWL, the K stands for what I know, and the W stands for what I need to know, and then the L stands for what I've learned. So a KWL is really asking students to think before, during, and after learning. And because reading and writing are both learning activities, they're both thinking activities, a KWL applies very nicely to both. Now keep in mind that reading-writing strategy. At the very beginning, in the first step, is pre-read and survey and question, what the text is all about before one even reads it. So the KWL reading guide works very nicely at that point in the process. And then the KWL writing guide works very nicely in the pre-write and the recite and the review stage. So they do it as a reader at the beginning of the process, and then after they've digested what they've read and they're getting ready to write, they do it as a writer, as a pre-writing activity. So look at how the questions just kind of shift a little bit in focus. What do I know? What prior knowledge do I have? And then as a writer, what does my audience know? What is my audience's prior knowledge? What do I wonder about? What do I want to know? What does my audience want to know? And sometimes that can be something very different. And isn't it wonderful to have this dialogue with them so that they can see, that there is this dialogue between reader and writer, and that writers take into consideration their audience. So why is this concept important? That's making a prediction. As a writer, what key ideas need to be included? That's a prediction. And what pattern of organization will I follow? That's a pre-writing choice. That's a prediction. And we all of us who write know that sometimes those choices change as we kind of get into the process of writing. And then at the end of it, as a reader, what have I learned? And at the end of the writing, what is it that my audience will have learned once they have read my piece of writing? So just asking students to use this same approach both in reading and writing on a particular piece of text in terms of reading the text and then responding to the text really guides them into seeing the connection between reading and writing. And it also shows them their very specific roles as readers and writers. Specific and distinct roles, I would say. Now this is everybody so familiar with this, and this is considered usually just a reading task. But because it is a writing task, I mean, you have to, write down, you use your pen, your paper, your computer to actually record this information. It has always been a reading-writing strategy. And all too often we keep this in the context of the classroom. One of the most potent lessons I've ever really experienced between me and one of my students is a student who was facing a really serious health crisis, and she was having to, in the near future, go to a doctor's appointment. And we had talked about the Cornell note-taking system. So we pulled it out, and in the keywords and questions section, we wrote down a lot of the keywords that she had already heard and some of the questions that she had. And then when she went to the doctor, she recorded the answers. Those keywords kind of prompted her, and the questions prompted her, and she took notes. She also took her husband with her, and I think he actually was the one that took the notes. And then when it was all over with and they got home, they summarized it. They restated what they think they heard the doctor say. She said it was so comforting to have this kind of a process. So this reading-writing strategy is not limited to the academic environment. It's a real-world activity, and it's wonderful to be able to show that to students. Concept word maps. Now this is something that we have always used in the reading and the writing classes, and it's just so exciting to see them together in the same class. The first part over here, the reading concept word map, is a very, very tried and true vocabulary building activity. And this one asks students again to use their writing to learn. Not only are they coming up with a definition and pulling information from the text, but they're also using the word in their own sentence. And then because so many of our learners are visual, I do offer them an opportunity, and research indicates it's great to offer them an opportunity to visualize, to draw a picture of the word. And I just wanted to show you one concept map that we use for a pattern of organization, the definition example concept map, that beautifully mirrors the vocabulary development concept map. I mean, they're really very, very similar. One is used as a reader, one is used as a writer. And the same relationship is easily seen with the other patterns of organization. In fact, let me go ahead and pull up two more so that you can see how these concept maps lend themselves very nicely. Whoa, sorry. Whoops. Pull that one up. Pull this one up. These are very, very familiar to us. We've used them in both our reading classes and in our writing classes. And again, if you look at it just in terms of a vocabulary development, it works well. If you pair this with a vocabulary worksheet that has more of a slant to the cause and effect or to the comparison and contrast, you can make your boxes, focus in on, synonyms, antonyms, what it's like, what it's not like. That was actually in the definition example contrast map. So you can really begin to see that these things work very well as vocabulary building tools, but also as reading comprehension and writing, pre-writing brainstorming tools. So if you look at the reading, writing, comparison, and contrast graphic organizer, and you think about how a student might use this during and after reading to prove that they have, or to enable them to comprehend the comparison and the contrast, or the cause and the effect that's being discussed in that particular passage. Then, a couple of steps later in the reading-writing strategy, when it's time for them to come up with their response to that passage, they may have this completed chart in front of them, and then have a blank one in which they can begin to fill in their own ideas. So as a writer, what I would ask them to do is to put in the appropriate information that they want to include from the passage, but also what real-world applications could they make? What examples could they provide from the real world? So that their writing is not just a regurgitation. It goes beyond the summary, and it really enables them to generate and brainstorm some ideas that are more out of their own response, their reader response. So again, it's using these same exact concept maps at different stages in the writing process, in the reading process, the reading-writing process. Now, these are stylistic activities. These are asking students to look at writing style. And remember, one of the directed learning activities was to read to learn about the use of language, or read to learn about text structure, and then to model that in their own writing. Well, for years we've been asking students to look at the feedback that we give them as on their own writing, and to identify their needs. Like I spent hours grading those papers, and then it seemed like they weren't paying attention to them until I said to them, listen, why don't you, I want you to take the feedback that I've given you, and I want you to transfer it to this chart, so that if I marked run-on your paper, I want you to write run-on in this chart, and then I want you to count up how many times that run-on was, that very skill was noted on that particular piece of writing. And what students ended up finding is that they did have a particular style, and that they were making the same mistake multiple times. And if they just learned one or two skills, their style would greatly improve. So using that, mirroring that in terms of what we do to teach writing, you can see that as a reader, before they even get to evaluating their own writing in terms of errors, that we can really show them the power of well-written material by asking them to review the style of a particular piece of writing. So not every single reader log will be focusing on every one of these. Like, they're not going to look at a piece of writing and think about figures of speech, sentence types, and punctuations, and use of quotes. That would be overwhelming, particularly before they've been taught each one of those skills. But they can put in the ones that they notice, or the ones that you have directed their attention to. And then this fosters a group discussion about the effectiveness, and then the application of this to their own writing. So oftentimes I find that although I talked in this presentation right now about the writer's log first, of course it's the reader's log that happens first, that occurs first in the classroom. So that we have this discussion, and then when they write their own piece, and they come back and they look at and they start analyzing their own piece of writing, if I have planned this well, I have already identified or directed their attention to what I want them to apply and model in their own work. And then I can have them go back and look and see, here's a model. Do you think that if you use this rule, or you use this concept in this paper to correct this particular issue, do you think that would be helpful and beneficial to you? And they make all sorts of connections that I didn't even expect. So these do work in tandem with each other. And then my favorite, I love this activity. Students do too. It's like a second chance for them. Many people do this, I'm sure, but the way in which I came across this is I taught gifted students in high school for several years. And every time I gave them a test, they were challenging every single question they got wrong. I mean, they were like belligerent. You know, why is this answer correct and why isn't this correct? And it just hit me. The reason that they do so well is because they challenge everything. And they start challenging it as soon as they turn the test in. They don't wait to get the results back. If there was a question that they were uncertain about, they were at my desk asking me about it right then and there. Or they were going to the book and looking up the answer and bringing it to me and telling me why their answer was right. Wouldn't it be great if our developmental students would do that? So here I am teaching them how to do it. Now this is similar to the Dear Editor cover letter that I showed you a little while ago. But the Dear Editor cover letter occurs before any particular piece of writing. This test prepare actually is before, during, and after any kind of a test activity. And let me just clarify what I consider a test activity. A writing assignment that they take home and they bring back in, that's a test. Anything that they do is a test. A practice exercise can be a test. I can give them information. So, I could say a learning activity, but students really respond to the concept of test repair. So before the test, I ask them to think about how did you prepare for this? What did you do to get ready? Do you feel prepared? What do you think is going to be on the test? And I do ask them to write this down. Then immediately after the test, they think about the questions that they might have missed or the part of the writing prompt that gave them difficulty. Whatever they feel challenged about, I want them to concentrate on that and focus on that. And then after they receive their score, I want them to really explain why they did what they did. Even the wrong answer. Why did you give that? Why did you do that? If it's a writing test and it's a grammar issue, sometimes it's just that they didn't proofread. They needed to proofread. They know the rule, but they didn't take time to apply the rule appropriately. And no one knows but them why they missed a test question. And no one can really hold them accountable except themselves. So this activity is a real growth activity for them. Students respond very, very well to this. So that's it. Those are the activities. And when it's all said and done, the most important element in that classroom is you and your student. This is indeed a picture of me and a teacher who really is the basis of my success. There's a handful of them. We all have them. That teacher that made all the difference in the world. And that's the kind of teacher I want to be. I want to be sure that I help my students find their fullest potential. And the best way to do that is to be enthusiastic and compassionate, to have high expectations, and to engage them and to insist that they engage as well. And of course, patience. And as I've traveled across the country, I have found that these are the hallmarks of developmental educators. This is what draws us into teaching this very special group of students. So I just wanted to encourage you. This teacher did not see the fruit of his efforts in me. He did not. I mean, I passed. I graduated, but it wasn't until years later that I truly understood and that I could truly act upon all the lessons that he truly taught me then. So in the end, you are the most vital, important part of the whole class. And here's that barcode again, that QR code that you can take a picture of if you have one on your iPhone, and of course the Google address for all of these documents. They're on open source. They're open to anybody that has this link, and you're more than welcome to download them and use them in your classrooms. And now, if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to hear from you.
Hi, DJ. Okay, yeah, we do have time for a couple of questions, and we have one from Brenna at Owens Community College in Ohio. She asks, in the collaborative learning process, does each group have the same article, and do you stop and ask for the summary questions, etc., from the group in class, or do you stop and talk to each group separately?
Oh, I think that's completely and totally up to each individual instructor. You can even take different parts of one particular, if it's a long passage or a chapter, like if I'm asking them to preview a chapter, You can even divide up sections among the groups, and then at the end of the activity, have everybody share, each group share what they learned with the larger group. So I think there's so much flexibility in that approach that you can really set it up any way that you want to. I tend to try and do it in one class setting, and I try to use it as a recap at the, to do the summary at the end of the session. I find that it doesn't work too well if we have to go into another class session. They forget to bring it. They didn't really, particularly early in the semester.
Okay, we have another question from Nick who asks, how do you use technology in the class, if at...
Excuse me, could you say that again?
Sure, no problem. We have a question from Nick who wants to know, how do you use technology in your class, if at all?
Well, we're fortunate at Daytona State College that we actually have classrooms that have computers in it for every single student. So we actually have the opportunity to have students to use technology on a daily basis. And what I try to do is I try to divide my class into certain phases. So sometimes, like if I'm introducing a new concept, we'll do the reciprocal teaching, and we won't be with our technology at all. We'll read the assignment together in that reciprocal teaching atmosphere. We'll get it summarized. That might be a whole class session. And then the next session, they might be brainstorming and writing. So they would be doing that on their on the computer itself. I also like to set up a great deal of time, and of course we have a lab as well that they go to, but I like to set up a lot of lab time where they're working independently. Again, that individualized learning plan, they've identified what they need to be working on through diagnostic testing and reading and writing activities. They probably need to work on main ideas and fact and opinion and particular grammar issues. So they have a list of lessons that they have to get through by the end of the semester and master. So I like to build in class time so that they can do that, and then that's when I go and sit at their elbows and go over their individualized learning plans with them or their portfolios with them and have one-on-one conferencing. So I use technology heavily in my classes.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's great that everybody has access to a computer on a daily basis.
And that's not everybody. That's an unusual situation, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up so we can prepare for the next session at 1. But just before we go, I wanted to say DJ is actually writing a new book for Pearson, a combo reading and writing book. So I just wanted to let everybody know that anyone that wants to review it or is interested in participating in an upcoming focus group can just leave their name and their email address here in the questions box today, and then we'll contact you shortly with information about that. That would be great.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, DJ, for your great presentation today.
Thank you for the opportunity, and good luck, everyone.
Thank you.